Thomas Brown was an old black man who devoted his entire life to raising two forsaken children he had found abandoned in a back street. Decades later, his ruthless employer falsely implicated him in a crime, and the courtroom turned against him, labeling him a swindler, a deceiver, and a man unworthy of leniency. With his hands bound and hope dwindling, the judge was about to pronounce a lifetime of imprisonment. But just as the gavel was poised to fall, two individuals emerged, and what they disclosed left the entire courtroom in shock. Before we go any further, if this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything to us and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stay with us till the very end. And if this story moves you, drop your thoughts in the comments and share it with a friend. Now, let's begin. The winter. That year was the kind that pierced through worn-out jackets and tattered footwear. The streets of the small industrial town carried the scent of smoke and frosty metal, the kind of place where people hurried home, their gazes fixed downward, ignoring anyone left behind. After a long, exhausting shift, Thomas Brown, a fatigued man in his late 50s with a persistent limp from years of factory labor, made his way home. His boss, Mr. Vincent, always told him he was too slow, too incompetent, a man lucky just to have a job. Yet Thomas never argued. He endured the insults, carried his pain, and kept his head down. That night, he passed a narrow alley behind the diner. The drone of the freezer fans mixed with the whistling wind, and there, tucked against the dumpster, were two children, pale, shivering, their clothes nothing more than rags layered on their frail bodies. Henry's arm was wrapped around his younger sister, Lydia, trying to shield her from the cold. Thomas stopped. He could have kept walking, just like everyone else did. His boss's words still echoed in his mind. Don't waste time on strays. You can barely feed yourself. And he was right. Thomas's meals were usually scraps, his room barely warm. But watching those kids, he felt a pull stronger than his own hunger. He crouched, his knees creaking, and the children looked up with eyes too old for their age. You two got anywhere to go? He asked softly. Silence, just a shake of the head. Thomas exhaled, his breath fogging in the air. He knew what it meant to be discarded, to be invisible, and he couldn't leave them there. Not tonight. He reached out a calloused hand. Come on, he said, his voice low, steady. Henry hesitated, but Lydia's tiny fingers slipped into his palm, ice cold. That was enough. By the time they reached his small apartment, neighbors peeked through cracked doors. That fool, one muttered under his breath to another. The old man can't pay his own bills. Now he's dragging strays inside. The other chuckled, shaking her head. He'll sink with them, Thomas heard. He always heard. But he just kept walking, two fragile lives following behind him. Inside, his place was no palace, just peeling wallpaper, a sagging couch, and a single heater that rattled louder than it warmed. Still, he laid blankets across the couch, warmed some broth, and watched as the children ate like they hadn't touched food in days. That night, as he sat in the corner, rubbing his aching leg, Thomas thought about how tomorrow his boss would mock him again, how money would stretch thinner than ever. But he also knew this. Those kids wouldn't be sleeping on frozen concrete anymore, not as long as he was alive, and with that quiet decision, a bond was sealed, one that would echo far louder than he ever imagined. The days that followed were not easy. Thomas worked at the steel factory, where the air smelled of burnt iron, where every clang of machinery seemed to shake his bones. His boss, Mr. Vincent, was a man who thrived on humiliation. He'd wait until the floor went quiet before barking. Across the hall, Brown! Even those orphans you dragged home probably move faster than you. The workers laughed, some uncomfortably, others eager to join in. Thomas never snapped back. He just wiped the sweat from his brow and kept pushing. But every insult, every glare was a weight he carried home with his limp dot. At night, though, the weight seemed to lift. He'd open the door to his apartment, and the children would run to him. Daniel, the boy, always with a book in his hand, eager to read out loud what he learned at school. His younger sister, Emily, often sat at the wobbly table, scribbling with a dull pencil, drawing pictures of houses that looked warmer and brighter than anything they had ever known. Thomas gave them his food when cupboards ran thin. He patched Daniel's jacket with clumsy stitches and saved coins for Emily's shoes. Some nights when the heater coughed and died, he huddled them close, pretending he wasn't cold himself. The neighbors gossiped in stairwells and corner shops. Whispers flew. "He'll end up on the street with them." One woman muttered as Thomas passed. Another man smirked. "A man of color raising 2 white kids. They'll turn on him the first chance they get." Thomas heard, but he never answered. Instead, he poured himself into the children. He taught Daniel how to change a tire, how to shake a hand with dignity. He showed Emily how to balance coins, how to stand tall, even when the world tried to shrink you. Still, Mr. Vincent never let him forget his place. When Thomas once asked for a day off to take Emily to the clinic, Mr. Vincent sneered, "You're not their father. Stop playing hero and get back to work." But Thomas did it anyway. He took the day, risking his wages. He walked Emily to the clinic with his hand firm on hers, knowing full well the cost. That night, when Mr. Vincent cut his pay in half, Thomas hid the slip in his pocket, pretending nothing had changed. Years passed this way. Sacrifice layered on sacrifice. The children grew. Daniel, with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, earned scholarships Mr. Vincent said he'd never deserve. Emily, once the quiet girl with pencils, grew into a fierce voice in school debates, unafraid to challenge anyone who mocked her strange little family. Thomas watched with quiet pride. His limp grew heavier, his back bent more each year. But the kids stood taller. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe maybe kindness wasn't wasted, maybe it was planting something that would bloom far beyond him. What he didn't know was how closely Mr. Vincent had been watching too, and how bitter the man had grown seeing Thomas build a family from scraps. By the time Daniel and Emily had gone off to college, Thomas's body carried decades of labor, his hands rough as stone, his back bent, his steps slower than ever, but his heart swelled with pride each time a letter arrived. Daniel studying law, Emily chasing journalism. He pinned their notes on the peeling wall like treasures. Mr. Vincent, however, hadn't softened. If anything, the years had sharpened his spite. He hated the sight of Thomas walking with his head just a little higher, hated hearing whispers about the orphans making something of themselves. To Mr. Vincent, it was proof that Thomas had stolen dignity he didn't deserve. One autumn morning, the trap was sprung. Thomas came home to find 2 policemen waiting by his door, their uniforms crisp, their expressions cold. A neighbor watched from her window, muttering, "Told you so. Always knew he'd end up in trouble." The officers shoved past Thomas, tearing through his modest apartment. From under the couch cushion, they pulled a small bag stuffed with cash and company equipment stamped with factory labels. Thomas's breath caught. He'd never seen it before. Within hours, he was in handcuffs, the metal biting into his wrists. Mr. Vincent stood outside the factory gates, arms folded, smirking as Thomas was led away. "Guess kindness doesn't pay after all," he sneered loud enough for workers to hear. A few laughed, others just turned away. The courtroom smelled of varnish and dust. Thomas sat hunched, his once strong shoulders sagging. Prosecutors painted him as a bitter old man who'd stolen to survive. Witnesses, workers Mr. Vincent had quietly paid off, claimed they'd seen Thomas sneaking around the storage rooms. Bystanders filled the benches whispering, "I knew he was too good to be true, that those kids he raised don't even know who he really is." Thomas said little. He wanted to scream, but years of swallowing insults had trained him into silence. He thought, of Daniel and Emily, but he couldn't drag them into this shame. Better they stay away. Better they never see him like this. When the judge's gavel struck, announcing that Thomas faced a possible life sentence, the room seemed to close in on itself. The walls pressed tight. The air grew thin. Thomas's eyes dropped to the floor, his heart heavy with a final truth. Maybe Mr. Vincent was right. Maybe a man like him was never meant to rise above his place. And then the doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Two figures stepped inside, confident, unshaken, eyes fixed on a man sitting alone at the defendant's table. Daniel and Emily, not the children he once carried home, shivering, but adults now, shaped by the very sacrifices he thought had gone unnoticed. The room stirred. Whispers turned into gasps. Mr. Vincent's smirk faltered for the first time. Thomas's chest tightened. He hadn't wanted them here, but as Daniel set down a stack of legal files and Emily lifted a recorder, scanning the faces in the gallery, he realized something he'd never let himself believe. His kindness had come full circle, and the battle wasn't over yet. The courtroom was buzzing now, restless as Daniel straightened his tie and stepped forward. Gone was the timid boy who once hid in alleys. He stood tall, voice steady, introducing himself as Thomas's defense attorney, papers slammed onto the table, files thick with evidence. Emily positioned herself in the gallery, recorder flashing red. She wasn't there just to watch. She was documenting everything. Her articles had already rattled powerful names, and now her pen was aimed squarely at Mr. Vincent. The prosecution tried to keep momentum, but Daniel cut through their case piece by piece. Witnesses who claimed they saw Thomas steal faltered under his questions. One stammered, admitting he'd only heard rumors. Another contradicted his own testimony when pressed. Daniel exposed the cracks like a surgeon opening wounds. And then came the bombshell. Emily rose, requesting permission to share a report. It detailed Mr. Vincent's history of wage theft, harassment, and falsified accounts at the factory. Backed by documents she'd unearthed as a journalist, murmurs swept the room. Mr. Vincent's face flushed red, his fists clenching white. Thomas sat frozen, blinking against the sting in his eyes. He had thought the children he saved had outgrown him, moved on into brighter worlds. But here they were, fighting with fire he had unknowingly passed down to them. The judge leaned back, tapping a pen, weighing the storm unraveling in front of him. "It seems," he finally said, voice echoing, "this entire case was built on manipulation." He looked at Thomas, then at Mr. Vincent. "The charges are dismissed." Gasps, applause, a few jeers aimed at Mr. Vincent as he stormed out. Defeated. Daniel placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Emily moved beside him, whispering, "You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Dad." That single word, "Dad," echoed louder than the gavel that had freed him. Neighbors who once mocked fell silent. Reporters scribbled furiously, and Thomas, old and weary, finally allowed his back to straighten, his eyes to meet the world. He had once lifted 2 children out of the cold. 20 years later, they had lifted him out of a cage. Because kindness doesn't die. It waits. It grows. And when the time is right, it saves. When Thomas chose kindness decades ago, he never imagined it would one day save his life. This story reminds us every act of compassion plants a seed that might return when we need it most. If you want more powerful stories of justice, sacrifice, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe and click on the next video. You won't want to miss what happens there.